Well, our second lecture for today, as you can see here, is called The Meaning and Morality of Market Competition and the Profit and Loss System. And to do this, we first need to understand the logic of why people are put in the position of having to make choices and decisions, and out of this interacting with their fellow human beings for various mutually beneficial purposes. So if we ask the question, why do people have to make choices? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have everything we wanted, when we wanted it, in any amount that we want? Tragically, that is not the case. We find ourselves having to give up certain things to get other things. And why is this the case? Well, economists will tell you that it's because of the concept of scarcity, that the means at our disposal, whether it be our physical energy, our mental strength, the number of hours in a day, the resources and raw materials that we find in our own circumstances to be available to us to use for various productive purposes, all of these are limited, insufficient, not enough, either in quantities or in their qualities, to enable us to apply them to achieve all the ends, goals, and purposes for which they might be assigned and used. Now, if our ends are greater than our means, then we are put in the position of having to decide what we're going to use those means for when we can't use them for everything. And as a consequence of this is that we have to decide, for example, how will we apply our physical strength? How will we devote our time? All of you are students. Well, most of you are students. Most of you are students here. And you feel this constraint of your time. There's only 24 hours in a day. All of us need some sleep. Is that not true? Come on, be honest. Who here has never slept? Come on, you've been awake since you were born. Come on, admit it. Don't be afraid. Okay. Now, all of us need some sleep, right? And usually think, the average person needs about 8 hours a day, approximately. So that means that leaves you 16 hours in the day. Well, that seems like a lot, but it's not. You have your classes to go to. You have your family obligations to take care of. You like just the economist calls it leisure time, to do your hobbies or your sports activities, or just hang out and enjoy the company of your friends. And we invariably find that there is more of the things that we would like to do with our time than the available hours in a day. Even when you find yourself with time on your hand, that's a scarcity problem. It's sort of like when you're taking an air flight and you're changing planes in some other airport, and the plane that you're connecting to has turned out to be delayed. So now you're stuck in the airport for 2 hours, let's say an extra 2 hours. Well, what are you going to do with those 2 hours? Well, I have 2 hours I didn't expect it to have. But the point is, well, shall I go window shopping? Right, the airports always have the little shops. Shall I go have something to eat at the restaurant? Shall I sit and listen to some music or read a book? I mean, you can't do all of that even in the 2 hours that you're waiting to catch the next flight. So we're constantly faced with these scarcities. And that means that we cannot have everything we want. In the marketplace, we devote a certain amount of our time and efforts to earning a living, working at a job that gives us money revenues with which we can then re-enter the market as consumers ourselves to buy the things that we desire. But we all know that the money income we earn is invariably far smaller relative to all the things that money could buy that we would like to purchase. So we have to decide, well, how shall I spend my money here? How shall I spend my money there? And such is the condition of man. Such is the condition of man. No matter how much we complain or protest or wish for a world of superabundance, we will not have it. Our desired ends, as I say here, always run ahead of available means. Insufficiency always confronts us. Scarcity therefore constantly forces us in the dilemma of having to choose. Shall I use the time to do this instead of that? Shall I use my resources and my efforts to do something else as opposed to this? And therefore we have to rank our alternatives in some personal order of importance to us. Now, often people view this as sort of like a rat race. Oh, man is always chasing after the brass ring. He never stops. It's a rat race of constantly going. And that's true. But that has nothing to do with capitalism or the marketplace. That's just the human condition. But there's one thing here, and that is the basis of all that we call civilization. That is the basis of all that we call civilization. What do I mean by that? Well, let me ask you something. What do you really need? You need a piece of meat, an animal skin to cover your body, and a cave to keep you out of the elements. Isn't that basically what you need? You need a piece of meat, an animal skin, and a cave. You're set for life, that's it. No, of course not. Okay, of course not. But everything else, since man crawled out of that cave, metaphorically and in a sense literally, is a creation of man's mind. It's artificial. Some caveman is sitting in the cave, and he notices the flickering of the fire leaving the shadows on the wall of the cave. And the shadows remind him of maybe the hunt of the day and the animals that he and his fellow tribesmen were killing or catching, or the imageries of his fellow cavemen, the shapes. And he notices that there's colored pebbles on the floor of the cave. And he starts following the silhouette of the shadows, and he draws things. And you know what? That's the beginning of art, right? That's the beginning of art. From that cave drawing on the wall to Picasso and Van Gogh. He's sitting in the cave at night, and he's kind of bored. So he picks up, a stick, and he starts thumping it on a rock. And he starts doing it in a certain pattern, like a rhythm. And that's the beginning of music, right? That's the beginning of music. Thumping a stick on a rock in a cave. And finally that leads to what? That leads to Mozart, Beethoven, Lady Gaga. It's true. It's true. And then in that ancient cave, long, thousands upon thousands of years ago, there's the little children of the tribe, and they're sitting around by the fire at night, and they're listening to one of the tribal elders tell them the tales and myths and stories of the origins of the tribe, their famous adventures, right? And this elder, he knows everything. Why? He's 24 years old and he's still alive. I mean, you were lucky if you made it to like 16 or 18 years old back in those caveman times, right? You're 22 or 24. You're ancient. You've seen it all. Boy, this guy knows everything. I have to listen to him tell these tales of the tribe quick before he dies when he's 25. Now that sounds weird, but that's the case. Lifespan was short. But what does he do? He starts telling mythologies and stories and accounts. And that's the beginning of literature. First in its oral form, and eventually when men in different parts of the world devised their forms of a written language, to then putting those stories on paper. And that becomes the basis of the famous novelists and writers of later thousands of years. So all that we call our culture is created by our imaginings. Look at this room here. The recessed lighting, the projector, the clothes that we're wearing, the glasses that enable me to see a little better, as I think a few others here, okay, or this piano, okay, or the recorder that's making a video of the presentations, or the food that we eat. All of this are things beyond what that caveman had. And why did this come about? Because we have a goal and a purpose, and we start going towards it, and we achieve it. But soon as we've achieved our goals and purposes, guess what? Our mind runs ahead and thinks of other things that what we've achieved makes us now think of, or that we hadn't thought of before. It's sort of like walking towards the horizon. No matter how far you walk towards the horizon, do you ever reach it? Yeah. No. It's because it's a ball. If it was flat like they used to believe, you'd just fall over. But it's a ball. Okay, it's a ball. So you keep walking towards the horizon, and no matter how far you walk, and the next sort of point on the horizon that you reach, the horizon is still ahead. Well, that's the human condition. Our mind imagines new things, better things, so that we always find that the means at our disposal, no matter how wealthy we become, are now, again, insufficient to what we're now imagining looking ahead once more. But that's the basis of all that we call the comforts, amenities, luxuries, necessities of what we consider modern life, as opposed to that ancient caveman with his fire in the cave with an animal skin on his body eating a piece of meat. And as I say here, the ultimate resource that man has is his mind. We all have degrees of physical strength to do stuff, but it is the human mind that imagines how shall we apply our physical strength and things around us that we define and discover as useful things to fulfill the imaginings that our mind creates for ourselves. That is the ultimate resource. What's in your mind. That's why education is important. Now, involved in everything, in every choice and decision, are costs and benefits. We can't escape from this. If you're a student and you say, well, you know, I only have a few hours available this evening, and I have an exam coming up, I could stay home and study, or I could go out and spend time with my friends. Now, let us suppose that you decided to stay home and study. And someone the next day says, well, what did it cost you to stay home and study? Well, from the economist's point of view, what it cost you is the next best alternative, the thing that your mind has imagined you would do instead if you hadn't decided to stay home and study. And that would have been spending those few hours with your friends having a good time rather than being at home. Another version of this is that, let's suppose you went to the movies on a Saturday night and you paid your X number of dollars, whatever it costs here to go to a movie on a Saturday evening. And then the next day someone says, well, what did it cost you to go to the movies? Well, you could say it's the X number of dollars that you paid for the ticket. But from the economist's point of view, it's not the money per se. What it cost you to go to the movies is what you could have done instead with those same 2 hours if you had not sat in the movie theater, and what that sum of money, let's say it was $10 to buy the ticket, what the $10 could have purchased instead. It's the alternative end, goal, purpose that you forego because you use the rare and the scarce means to do one thing as opposed to another. Now that means that the idea of a cost and a benefit isn't unique to business decision making or the calculations of the enterprise or the capitalist system. Cost and benefit is in everything that we do. If you decide to do one thing with the limited means at your disposal, it means that you had to forego something. And everything that we do, therefore, has a cost. You know, there's a phrase that economists like to use sometimes. A phrase that economists like to use sometimes. Tanstoffel. Tanstoffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Tanstoffel. Okay? Even when someone says, hey, I'm taking you out for lunch, and they pick up the check, it wasn't free. You enjoyed the meal, but you had to sit there and have lunch with them. And you maybe chose to do that because you wanted the nice meal. Or even if you enjoyed that person's company who's treated you to lunch, isn't there the other things you could have done for that hour and a half or so that you were in the restaurant? That's what you forgo. Implicitly, there's always a cost to everything. And that means that everything involves profit and loss. Again, profit and loss isn't uniquely dependent just on the marketplace. Capitalism, oh, the profit seeker, the loss avoider in business. If I ask you, why did you stay home and study last night instead of enjoying an evening with your friends? You said, because I thought I would gain something by putting in the extra study time to do better on the exam and get that A or B plus. Now that net gain that you believe that would make you better off over the alternative you could have done is the profit that you had hoped for from your act. We all are profit seekers. Now, why are you here with me today? I know you're thinking, why am I here? No, but separate from that. Okay. Why are you here? I presume that you haven't been forced to come here, right? You might have been induced somehow, but you haven't been forced here. Okay? But that's a profit. Maybe someone had offered you, sometimes, you know, it's true, professor said, well, if you go to hear the public lecture, you get some extra credit or something, right? That's done sometimes, isn't it? Of course it is. Okay. Now, of course, you're not here for any of those reasons, I know. But you see, that's the profit. Now, there might be someone here. I know it's shocking and hard to believe, but there might be someone here who's actually here because they wanted to hear what I had to say. I don't go figure. I don't know. My wife doesn't, but that's a different story. But she just falls asleep while I'm talking about this stuff. I keep going even when she's asleep. That's the problem anyway. So, can't turn it off. But why did you come to it? Maybe it's because you were offered some extra credit to boost the grade. That's a profitable gain, is not? Or maybe because you thought, well, let's hear what this guy has to say. Maybe it'll be interesting, useful, informative. That happens sometimes too. I know it's hard to believe. And that's the profit from what you could be doing now in this period of time instead. Okay? Everyone is a profit seeker in one way or form or another. Not just, oh, are my revenues larger than my expenses in running a business or an enterprise, for example. And we're all loss avoiders. We never intentionally act with the purpose of suffering a loss. None of us say, well, you know, I really prefer doing X, but I did Y, because Y would make me worse off. Oh boy, how much can I make myself worse off today? No, not many of us do that. We're all pursuing in our simple and mundane and profound ways, trying to make ourselves in some little and our incremental way better off each day, not worse off. But sometimes we make mistakes. Someone says, well, okay, so you went to the movie last night. What do you think of the movie? It's the worst movie I ever saw in my entire life. What a waste of my time and money. Well, then you're, after the fact, you're saying is that though I thought I'd have an entertaining drama, a funny comedy, whatever, I didn't laugh and it was a boring story. So after the fact, you might evaluate that the cost was greater than what you got out of it, the benefit. And you might feel that you wish you hadn't gone, you hadn't spent the money, so the time and the money could have been used for something else. Then you're saying the cost was greater than the benefit, and that happens too. But that's because we live in an imperfect world where we have imperfect knowledge, and we sometimes make mistakes. But we are always profit seekers in all that we do. Retrospective judgments or evaluations that we have chosen poorly is the realization that we have suffered a loss. But we are always shooting for a profit, though sometimes we may suffer a loss. Now, another aspect of this is that how does this then bring about in the market? Well, I want to start this with a reference to this famous Scottish economist of the 1700s, again, Adam Smith, from his book, The Wealth of Nations. And he formulated this idea of a system of natural liberty. And in a nutshell, he says, all systems either of preference or of restraint, therefore being completely taken away. No more government regulations, no more government restrictions, no more government controls, no more government commands. You're a free person now. All systems with either preference or restraint, therefore being thus completely taken away, the obvious and simple system of natural liberty establishes itself of its own accord. Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, which means, right, deception or fraud or cheating. Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left completely free to pursue his own interest, his own way, and to bring both his industry and capital, his resources, into competition with those of any other man or order of men, a group of men. The sovereign is completely discharged, that is government, is completely discharged from a duty in the attempting to perform which he must always be exposed to innumerable delusions, and for the proper performance of which no human wisdom or knowledge could ever be sufficient. And what is that task for which no individual human knowledge could ever be sufficient? The duty of superintending, supervising, controlling, overseeing, directing the industry of private people, and of directing it towards the employments most suitable to the interest of the society. Okay? So governments don't have the knowledge, wisdom, or ability, that is, politicians, bureaucrats, do not have the knowledge, wisdom, ability to know how you should do and what you should do and where you should do it. You know that. Well, then what is the role of government, Adam Smith says? And that's what he then goes on. According to the system of natural liberty, the sovereign, government, has three duties to attend to. First, the duty of protecting society from violence and invasion of other independent societies. National defense. I know you're always concerned with those people, in Costa Rica. They could invade the Bahamas any day now. And so you need a few, coastal defenses and some military forces to protect you from those wild and crazy Costa Ricans. Not really? Oh, okay, I thought that was a major threat here, the Costa Ricans or something. Anyway. See, you see wrong, you read the wrong thing in the newspaper, you get confused. Anyway, but national defense, right? That's usually considered a function of government, right? Second one, the duty of protecting as far as possible every member of the society from the injustice or oppression of every other member of it, or the duty of establishing an exact administration of justice. What Smith is saying there is police and courts, right? There can be foreign bandits, right? A foreign invader, but there's more likely a domestic bandit, right? The thief, the crook, the murderer, the aggressor. So that's what you have police for. Hopefully to deter that, but if it occurs, to try to catch the guilty party. And then what? Well, is he actually the guilty party? Has a crime occurred? That's what a system of justice is for, right? Rules of law. And the procedures to determine guilt, innocence, and what type of crime has been committed and what the punishment should be. All written down so there's nothing arbitrary, capricious, random, at the whim and wish of some guy in political power merely because he has that power. And then third, the duty of erecting and maintaining certain public works and certain public institutions, which it can never be for the interest of any individual or small number of individuals to erect and maintain, because the profit could not repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals, though it may frequently do much more than repay it to a great society. Now, all Adam Smith means here is some infrastructure stuff, roads, bridges, harbors, dredging a harbor, maybe a lighthouse. But basically, Smith is saying that except for a few things, he believed maybe, also I should say in fairness, he also believed that elementary education, everybody should read, write, be able to do arithmetic, to at least be in minimally sense an informed member of a society, literate. But other than that, Smith is basically saying people should be free to interact, to decide how to guide and manage their lives in free association with their fellow men. Well, if that's the case, how can we be sure that chaos won't occur? Don't we need somebody to tell us what to do, where to do, when to do, and for what, so things get done? Why, everybody doing their own thing, that could be chaos, disorder. Adam Smith said that there are gains from trade. People discover that their own physical abilities, their mental capacities, the resources at their disposal don't enable them to be able to fulfill and satisfy all the goals that they would like to achieve. But there are others, their neighbors, who might have an ability, a skill, a resource to do things that they can't, or at a lower cost than if they were to try to do it themselves. And there emerge gains from trade. And I just use a simple example here. Two people, John and Bill. John has horses, Bill has cows. John has no cows, Bill has no horses. And are there gains from trade? Yes. As long as each one of them says, well, let's see, could we trade a horse for a cow? I have some extra horses, I have no cows, you have some extra cows, I have no horses. And I'd be willing to trade what I have for some of yours. And as long as each individual believes that in trading a horse for a cow for a horse, that what he's gaining and the uses of the thing he's gaining are of a higher value to him, incrementally, than what he has to give up, then he will trade what he has for what the other person is offering. If I go to the corner store and I buy a newspaper today, why do I do that? It's because I view that the information that I can get out of reading today's newspaper is of a greater value to me than the dollar price that I have to pay to buy that copy of the newspaper. Why does the guy at the corner store sell me one of the copies of the newspapers he has for sale? Because he values more highly the things he could spend that money on than parting with one of the copies of today's newspaper. Now, again, profit and loss. I could read the newspaper today and say, today there was nothing really interesting. It was kind of boring, nothing new, useful, waste of my time and the money. So we could read the newspaper and say, today it wasn't worth what I paid for it or the time I gave to read through some of the articles. But it doesn't change the fact that in entering into any exchange with another person, it's because you expect to be getting something from him that you value more highly than what you're giving in trade, and he reverse order. And people therefore learn that there are gains from trade in this fashion. And what reinforces this is what Adam Smith developed as his idea of the division of labor. Okay? By cooperating in a system of specialization, individuals are able to dramatically increase the potential productivity in comparison to self-sufficient production, under which each individual attempts to produce all that he needs through his own labor. Men develop speed, dexterity, and technical precision with the assistance of machines that focus their activities on one or more small handful of tasks. The productivity of labor, that is output per worker at his tasks, increases the quantities, qualities, and varieties of goods available in this way. Adam Smith tells the famous story, it's in the opening chapter to The Wealth of Nations, about a pin factory. Imagine that everyone was attempting to make pins on their own. You're by yourself, you have to do every stage of the pin production process yourself. And he says here, if a man tried to do this, he'd be lucky if he made maybe 10 pins in a day. But men dividing their labor in the pin factory, one group of people is stretching out the wire. After stretching out the wire, they pass it to another group of people, like a conveyor belt, right? The other people, having now gotten the stretch wire, they cut it into uniform lengths. That's going to be the shaft of the pin. Then when they've done that, they pass it to another group of people who sharpen one end of the shaft. That's going to be the pointy part of the pin. And while they're doing that, there's another group of people who are hammering down metal like flatten a pancake and then cookie cutting out what? What will be the heads of the pin. And then after those are all done, those parts are passed to another group of people in the factory who, in some method of soldering that Adam Smith in the chapter does not explain because he assumes everybody would know what he's talking about, they attach the head of the pin to the shaft. And he explains that by men focusing their attention and doing one thing and passing on their task and effort in the process and then to another, men can make up to 48,000 pins in a day. Where if each man was attempting to make pins on their own, having to do all of it all by himself, step by step, you'd be lucky if you made one or at the most 10 pins in a day. So division of labor raises the productivity of people. So people participate in a division of labor and they trade their goods with each other that they're producing. But how do we know that the right things will be produced in the right quantities, in the right amounts, where people need them? And that's what Adam Smith meant by the invisible hand. Smith argued that through a system of division of labor and a rule of voluntary exchange, men become interdependent for all the necessities and luxuries of their life. But precisely because the system of natural liberty does what? Excludes violence, theft, or fraud. The only way any individual can acquire from others that which he desires is by applying his knowledge, abilities, and resources in a manner that offers to others what they desire. So they will give and trade what they have, which the first person wants to obtain instead. Thus, though it is no part of their motivating intention to improve the conditions of life of others, in their own self-interest, each individual must devote his efforts to serving the wants of others as a means to his own ends. While this is no part of the individual's intention, Smith says, the cumulative effect for society was that those goods most valued by others in society were the ones produced and offered on the market. This outcome, he argued, was superior to any attempt by those in political power to consciously and intentionally guide production into various directions. Those in political authority possess neither the knowledge, nor wisdom, nor ability to do so better than each man in his own corner of society who is most familiar with the surrounding circumstances and opportunities that he may face and discover and try to take advantage of. The fact is, self-interest is part of human nature. It's not going to be eliminated. It's been there since the beginning of time. The question is, how do we harness self-interest that, besides giving opportunities for the individual to improve the circumstances that is guiding him, that it can have also beneficial effects for others in society as well, since we're not going to change human nature. And Smith is arguing is that through the institutions of the market, we harness self-interest to serve the interests of others in society and for a rising improvement in everyone's conditions, taking the long view. Why so? Well, as I say, if you can't kill, if you can't steal and you can't cheat, then how do you get what the other guy has that you want? You have to ask yourself, how do you apply your knowledge, your ability, your efforts to manufacturing something, supplying something that they would value enough that they would take it in exchange for what they have that you want? And if everyone is doing this, then the cumulative effect is that all human condition has been improved for the society as a whole by each one just naturally following their own self-interest. And even though it was no part of their intention, it serves everyone. Now, it has become almost a joke, at least in the United States, maybe here too, that you turn over the label on many, many products, and what does it say? Made in China. It seems like everything is made in China. But to be honest, everything is not made in China. I mean, Americans have this image, everything is made in China. Actually, if you look at the import-export statistics of the United States, only approximately 19%, about 20% of imports into the United States come from China. So that means 80% are coming from the rest of the world. But it often has that impression in our minds. Okay. Why are people in China making stuff that we're interested in buying, and often the qualities, features, and characteristics that we're interested in having in the product, and quite often at a price they're willing to pay? Because it's in their self-interest. How can they improve their circumstances to earn the income that enables them to then themselves buy the things that they desire from others offering things in trade, if they don't first apply themselves in the most positively directed way to make things that others value that will maximize the income and profits they can earn from doing it? From this perspective, what's important is outcomes, not intentions. That bothers a lot of people. Oh, he had bad intentions. Yeah, sometimes people have bad intentions. And it would be nice if they had good intentions. But even if people have intentions different from the ones that you'd like them to have, if the institutional setting in which they must apply themselves, if they're going to better themselves, is one in which they can only do so by having positive spillover effects on others in the process, then that's all that's needed for a society of mutually beneficial prosperity and betterment. How is this all brought about? It's brought about through the price mechanism. Right? The price mechanism, this refers to the set or network or structure of exchange ratios at which goods are bought and sold on the market for each other. They express how much of one good has to be given or traded to acquire some other good in exchange. Thus, among hunters, 2 beaver might trade for 1 deer, or 3 pairs of shoes might exchange for 1 suit of clothes, or 4 economics lectures might be given for 1 night at a nice hotel. Now, in our society of complex trade and exchange, goods do not trade one for the other like this, which is called barter exchange. Instead, goods are bought and sold through money, a medium of exchange. An economics professor, he sells 4 lectures for, let's say, $1,000, $250 a lecture. He then is able to spend that money in the market for those goods he actually may desire to have. Perhaps $300 for a nice suit, $500 for his monthly apartment rent, $150 spent at the marketplace for groceries, and $50 for a night out with his friends at a good restaurant. You add up those numbers and it comes to the 1,000. Each of these prices inform about the relative value and scarcity of the goods offered. Thus, the economics professor has to deliver 2 lectures to earn enough to buy his monthly rent, and on the other hand, 1 paid for economics lecture enables him to buy 5 nights out at a good restaurant. Now, these things occur through this money, this medium of exchange, but it doesn't change the fact that each of us are trading each other's goods and services with each other, which would be difficult if we had to do it directly. I always find it shocking to even think of this, but if I were to go into my local grocery store and say to the manager or the owner, you know something, I need a carton full, a basket full of groceries for this week. If you'll give that to me, I'll give you 4 economics lectures. Now, for somebody, I don't understand. He probably wouldn't want to hear 4 economics lectures in exchange for a basket full of food. Who wouldn't want to hear economics lectures, right? Go figure. I don't understand people's preferences here. Anyway, I don't have to worry about finding some guy who wants to hear econ lectures to have my meal tonight. No, it is sufficient that I find some people, such as students who pay tuitions to go to college, that I find some people who want to hear economics lectures, and that I earn a sum of money income that then I can use to spend on the things that I want from others in the society, even if those others selling them to me would never want to hear an econ lecture in their life. And why are they selling me those things for the money that I have to give in trade for them? Because they know that they too, having earned their money incomes, can use that same money to re-enter the market and buy things from others when those others wouldn't be interested in buying their particular product if it had to be done in barter, that is directly one good for another. That's the importance of money exchanges in society. The price system also acts as incentives. If the price of a good rises, say due to an increase in consumer demand for the good, the higher price will act as the motive for existing or potential sellers to increase the quantity supplied of the good to match the greater demand. Or if there's if the price of a good falls because of a decrease in the consumer demand for the product, that lower price will reduce the profitability and the incentive, and the supply for that good will decrease. Likewise, if the price of a good decreases due to an increase in the supply, this will act as an incentive for consumers to demand more, because at the lower price, it is less expensive and they buy more. If the supply decreases, then there's less available and the price will tend to rise and people will economize a bit more. The interaction of market demand and supply works to raise or lower the market price in a direction that tends to establish an equilibrium, a balance between the supplies and demands of the market. And since as business students, some of you or most of you at least had principles or basic microeconomics, X marks the spot. Neither a surplus of more being produced at a market price than consumers are interested in buying, nor a shortage. More people wanting to buy something than suppliers are offering because the price is too low. Okay? And therefore the market adjusts and moves the price in the direction that will establish market equilibrium. If the price is $5 and suppliers were found it attractive to produce, in my example here, 60 units of this good, but at $5 a piece, consumers are only interested in buying 10, there's a surplus, an unsold inventory of 50, 60 minus 10. So how do sellers get rid of unwanted inventories, excess supply? Tell you what I'm going to do. It's on sale this week. And as the price goes down, some people say, it wasn't worth paying $5 for, but at $4, I'll buy some of it. Or I'll buy more than I was willing to buy at $5. And at $3. And then finally at $2, the demand has increased enough and the inventory has been sold off enough that the market is tending towards balance. As much as people want to buy is just matching the amount that suppliers are now willing to produce and sell. In this example, around 35 units at a price of about $2.50 a piece, right, just for the sake of the example. Or if it's too low, at a price of $1 a piece, consumers would find it attractive to demand, it looks like here, about maybe 53 units, 55 units. But the problem is at that relatively low price, sellers, given their costs of manufacturing, would only find it attractive to produce 10 of it. Their time and labor and resources and money to invest in things would be better spent making more valuable things given the relatively low price of this one. So the amount that consumers want to buy, around 55 units, is greater than the 10 that the suppliers would be willing to supply. So what's the response to that? Well, don't sell to Joe, sell to me. I'll pay an extra 75 cents for it. And so the price starts getting bid up. And as the price goes up, it becomes more attractive and profitable to start producing more. But at the higher price, some buyers drop out of the market. Well, it really is not worth that price, I'm not going to buy it. Or, it's getting a little bit expensive, I'm not going to buy as much as I used to, until the price is converging again to a balance or an equilibrium between what businesses find it profitable or attractive to produce and the amount that consumers are willing to buy. Does that mean that in every instance the markets are in balance? No, this is a tendency. Okay? It's a tendency. Think of like when a feather is falling to the ground. Right? Gravity pulls it down. But can there not be instances where a strong current of wind counteracts the force of gravity and temporarily makes the feather rise again before it starts its movement down to the ground again? Well, that's changing circumstances in the market. Demands change, supplies change. People's judgments as to what they think things are worth to produce or to purchase change. And so it's always like a moving target. But it doesn't change the fact that that's sort of like a magnet, the point towards which it's being pulled. Now, it's very common in economics textbooks, again, since most of you have taken some basic microeconomics, it is very common in economics textbooks to focus on the conditions and requirements for that perfect matching of supply and demand, the equilibrium. But the fact is, in the real world, consumer demands are always open to change. New technologies can be and are being introduced into various production processes. And the supplies of factors of production, land, labor, capital, resources, are changing in their quantity, availables, and their qualities. The crucial task in the market is to discover what are the new and changing conditions to which people must constantly adapt and adjust to bring about a tendency for a matching of the supply and demands. Now, a famous economist named Friedrich Hayek referred to competition as a discovery procedure. Competition is always a discovery procedure. Competition is important because its outcomes are unpredictable. In sporting events or examinations or contests of various sorts, it would be absurd to hold competition if we already knew who in advance would be the winner. I wish to consider competition as a procedure for discovering facts which, if the procedure did not exist, would remain unknown or at least would not be used. To use his example, if we knew who was going to win a foot race, for example, ahead of time, who would come in second and third, their relative times, as well as the place positions, what would be the point of holding the race? It would be redundant. Why do we hold the race? Because we can never be certain in the next race who's going to cross the finish line first, second, third, and the relative speeds at which they will do so. Anyone who's watched marathons in the Olympics, sometimes the same guy who won 4 years ago will win again this time. But often not. Or even if he's in the race competing again, he comes in second or third, or not even in one of the top 3 place positions. We can't know these. It's precisely because now why is this unknown? Because we only discover what people have it in them to do through their effort to try. Let me give you an example. I'm a little older. My body has started to hate me, and I broke an ankle. I had a problem with a disc, and so but I used to run. I used to run 7 miles a day. And I used to run 7-minute miles, right? 42 minutes, my 7 miles. That's not championship, but it's nothing to be ashamed of either. And when I was out running every day, I was competing. You know who I was competing against? Okay, can I complete the run today when sometimes you're not in the mood? Can I do the same pace that I on average tend to do? Can I finish my laps around the circumference of a rather large park that I lived near at that time? And can I sprint faster at home, even though I'm really kind of starting to get tired, right? Well, how well could I do? How much better could I do today than I did yesterday or a week ago? That I could only discover that in the doing, as well as in the competition against others. I was living partly in New York at that time, New York City, and I would run in 10Ks through Central Park and then up the northern part of Manhattan to where Cloister was, up a hill, and then back down towards Central Park. How well? I never made it near the front of at the finish line. I was always sort of in the middle of the pack. But how much better could I do? And how much better was I compared to others that I see around me? I couldn't know that, nor could they, other than through the race itself. I remember one time I was running up the incline up this sort of like towards this Cloister building, in northern Manhattan Island, and I'm really working. When you're running uphill and it's hot, I'm pushing myself, and this little 14-year-old kid goes by me. Wing! I wanted to trip that little kid. I'm working my butt off, and he's just zipping along like it's nothing to him. Anyway, no, I didn't do it. Right, I'm playing nice by the little social rules. I didn't do it. But you don't know any of this other than through the doing. Who can make the better product? The improved product, the new product, the less expensive product, the better technology manufactured product. We don't know this other than when people have an open competitive avenue and arena to attempt and try, and to see how well they can do and compared to others who are also in the marketplace attempting to gain that same consumer business. That's the importance of competition. It's precisely because we don't know who can come up with the new, better, and less expensive idea other than through the trying and the trials of the everyday and unending marketplace. Another economist named Joseph Schumpeter placed great importance that in the competitive process, resources do not come together themselves. Someone has an idea, and he hires the labor, he purchases the raw materials, he rents the land or the factory of the machinery, and guided by his vision and idea, he applies the resources, including labor, that he's contracted for, and he guides them to produce a product based upon what he thinks the consumers will want in the future, that he can make in the qualities they desire and pay a price that will at least cover his expenses and maybe earn him that profit. And so Schumpeter referred to the entrepreneur especially as an innovator. He argued that the entrepreneur should be thought of as the innovator of the market process. What does he do? He develops new or significantly changed quality products. He introduces new methods of production. He opens new markets. He discovers new ways of applying resources. And he brings radical changes in the organizational structures of industry. What is innovation? This. Okay? This. You know, I'm old enough. You young whippersnapper, you. I'm old enough to remember when this did not exist. You had an old-fashioned phone that sat on a desk with a cord. Okay? And it didn't even have buttons. You had to do a rotary dial. And before that, that's before my time, number please, you'd have to wait for an operator to come on the line to make the call. And how far could you go? As far as the cord could take you. But we don't have that anymore, and you know why? Because of innovation and change and improvement and competitive opportunity in the communications market. So that what was originally just a flip cell phone is now basically your entire world. This is not just a phone bouncing off satellites above the earth or cell towers. What is this? This is your email. This is your text messaging. This is your apps for music, for watching movies. I was at the hotel last night having dinner, and you know, my wife is back home. I'm here alone, a lonely guy. So I'm sitting at the dinner table, and I'm waiting for my meal. I propped this up, you know, because I had Wi-Fi at the hotel, and I'm on Netflix, watching one of the episodes in the new series episodes of House of Cards, which is about, you know, corruption in Washington. It's a great series. It brings out the worst of what politicians are like. Good. Anyway, so a bunch of bums. Anyway, so I'm sitting there watching a movie at dinner table in the Bahamas being broadcast from, I don't know where Netflix is broadcast from. Okay? Amazing. This is all due to competition. And while admittedly these are not cheap, but if you compare the prices for cell phones that had far fewer qualities 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in terms of quality as well as price, you're getting more for your dollar. That's what competition has done. Did Steve Jobs make a fortune from his iPhone? Yeah. But he made a fortune because he offered us something that we were willing to pay for, one phone at a time, that we decided would make our lives more easier, convenient, enjoyable, and easy. And therefore he earned all of his money quite honestly. Nobody was strong-armed to buy an iPhone or to buy a new updated one. Schumpeter says here in a famous book of his, this is the origin of economic development, economic improvement. Development in our sense is a distinct phenomenon, entirely foreign to what can be observed in the general flow of the economy. It is a spontaneous and discontinuous change in the channels of the flow, disturbance of equilibrium, which forever alters and displaces the equilibrium states of the market previously existing. And then in one of his most famous lines, he said, you're not going to understand competition. You're not even going to understand whether monopoly is a good thing or a bad thing if you look at it at a moment in time. You need to look at the market as a process over years. And this is a famous phrase of his, the perennial gale of creative destruction. In dealing with capitalism, we are dealing with an evolutionary process that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. He calls this the process of creative destruction. You destroy the old, and you replace it with something new and better. That is the essential fact about capitalism, Schumpeter suggested. The fundamental impulse that sets and keeps the capitalist engine in motion comes from the new consumer goods, the new methods of production or transportation, the new markets, the new forms of industrial organization that capitalist enterprise creates. In capitalist reality, as distinguished from its textbook picture, the kind of competition which counts is the competition for the new commodity, the new technology, the new source of supply, the new type of organization, the competition that commands a decisive cost or quality advantage. It is hardly necessary to point out that competition of the kind we have in mind acts not only when in being, but also when it is merely an ever-present threat. It disciplines before it attacks. The businessman feels himself to be in a competitive situation, even if he is alone in his field. Okay, so Steve Jobs comes up with the first iPhone. By the way, this is only a little over 10 years old. We take this so much for granted, we forget that this is only 10 years old, right? 11 years old, I guess now. And this was it for a while, right? It was so innovative and radically new that there was no close second, okay? But did Steve Jobs sit on his laurels? No, because he was aware of the fact that it was, consumers wanted it, that he was raking in the dough, that there were profits to be made, would itself act as the motive and incentive for people to say, look, big bucks to be, how can I take his idea, improve it, modify it, make it better so I can sell a alternative version to attract some of that consumer business away. So even before the first rival showed up with a competitive alternative to his iPhone, Steve Jobs was already thinking how to improve it to stay ahead of the competition that had not yet even appeared. That's the nature of the dynamism of the market. In the open and competitive market economy, it is the buying patterns of the consumers that determine on a day-to-day basis who holds and maintains their positions as entrepreneurs within the social system of division of labor. Successful entrepreneurs earn profits and increase their financial capacity to expand their enterprises to increase their supplying of consumer-desired goods and services on the market. Unsuccessful entrepreneurs suffer losses and have diminished financial capacity to maintain the size and scope of their enterprises in the face of their failure to meet consumer demands better or equal to their competitive entrepreneurial rivals. Thus, the competitive market forms an ongoing selective process, shifting control and decision-making over production from the less to the more competent entrepreneurial hands in the service of consumer demands for goods and services. IBM dominated the computer market for a long time ago, for a long time. Oh, IBM, oh, IBM. And guess what? Others came along and said, we can make computers, either desktop or then laptop, easier, better, more functional, better screen resolution, lower price. And IBM thinking, oh, I've been around forever. And what happened to IBM's share of computers? It fell dramatically, didn't it? It fell dramatically. If you do not keep satisfying consumer demand, both in terms of what consumers want and better than the rival who's trying to capture some of the same consumer business as well, you're going to lose out until finally your profits start going down, and you're finally threatened with a loss column at the end of the day, which will drive you out of business. And that's the ongoing process of the market all the time. As a famous Austrian economist named Ludwig von Mises pointed out in his book, Human Action, the behavior of the consumers makes profits and losses appear and therefore shifts ownership of the means of production from the hands of the less efficient to those of the more efficient. The market makes people rich or poor, determines who shall run the big plants and who shall scrub the floors, fixes how much people shall work in the copper mines and how many in the symphony orchestras. None of these decisions is made once and for all. They are revocable every day. The selective process of market competition never stops. It goes on adjusting the social apparatus of production to the change in demand and supply. Ownership of the means of production, that is the businessman who owns his enterprise and the resources connected with it. Ownership of the means of production is not a privilege but a social liability. Capitalists and landowners are compelled to employ their property for the best possible satisfaction of the consumers. If they are slow and inept in the performance of these duties, they are penalized with losses. He who does not use his property in serving the consumer in the most efficient way is doomed to failure. Doomed to failure. And there's Ludwig von Mises, what would nowadays be considered politically incorrect, holding a cigarette. That's why I chose the picture. I'm just that kind of guy, what can I say? And this just reiterates this. In the capitalist system of society's economic organization, the entrepreneurs determine the course of production. In the performance of this function, they are unconditionally and totally subject to the sovereignty of the buying public, the consumers. If they fail to produce in the cheapest and best possible way those commodities which the consumers are asking for most urgently, they suffer losses and are finally eliminated from their entrepreneurial position. Other men who know better how to serve the consumers replace them. Okay? What makes profits emerge is the fact that the entrepreneur who judges the future prices of the products more correctly than other people do by some or all of the factors of production at prices which, seen from the point of view of the future state of the market, are too low. Thus, total costs lag behind the prices which the entrepreneur receives. The difference is entrepreneurial profit. Now, what's important, or they suffer losses, but what is important for Mises in that last paragraph, it is the entrepreneurial decision that creates profit or loss. It is mental acts, the mind of the entrepreneur, from which profits ultimately originate. Profit is a product of the mind, of success in anticipating the future state of the market. It is a spiritual and intellectual phenomenon. Resources do not organize themselves. They have to be guided by a vision, an idea. How can we take this and make something, transform it into something that will be of greater use and value than the raw resources themselves can be utilized for? Value added, if you will. And it is the human mind who sees the potential of taking stuff and seeing them as useful means to achieve the production of a desired product that people have as an end, a goal to purchase. And to imagine the ways of organizing production and directing production, and to always be looking over your shoulder, like in the foot race, who's the competitor trying to nip at my heels to get there first with a better product that the consumers will buy instead of mine? That is the essence and the value and importance of the market system, the competitive system, the profit and loss system. Each man is acting in his own self-interest. But those institutions of the market, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, right? No fraud or deception, means that each man must apply himself in ways that improve the circumstances of others as the avenue to make his own circumstances better, even though he is not consciously intending to improve the conditions of mankind. Self-interest harnessed for the common good by allowing each individual to have control over his own life as a free person. That is the essential, profound dynamism of a free market, competitive, capitalist system. And it is what has enabled us to escape from that first graph that I put up in the morning lecture of poverty of mankind for thousands of years, and then slowly over the last few hundred years, a rise out of poverty. It's because human minds were freed from the stranglehold of government controls, regulations, commands, and restrictions. That in that system of what Adam Smith called the system of natural liberty, each man is free to use his own mental and physical abilities as he chooses in competition with others, and that competition enhances the quality of all. Thank you very much. Okay, again, we have a little bit of time for Q&A, right?
Yes, sir. 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Any questions or comments, suggestions, reflections, ruminations on the meaning of life? Assuming life has a meaning. Oh, no, it doesn't? I'm now confused. Okay. Yes?
Quick question.
Yes.
This literature is actually on the thumb drive, right?
A version of this literature, not these PowerPoints. But we are videotaping the lectures. I know that they're going to be put up on YouTube, is that correct? And the gentleman back there who's videotaping this, and as I move around and song and dance a little bit, he's going to be taking my PowerPoints and superimposing them into the video. So both my verbal presentation and the slides will be available. Okay? All righty. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
One is, which YouTube channel will this be available on?
When?
Which?
Oh, which YouTube channel?
Nassau Institute.
Nassau Institute.
.org.
Right, okay. And the other question?
Where can we get a copy of, a flash drive for those of us who signed up and didn't get one?
From Mr. Lowe back there. You have some of the flash drives?
Yes, did you sign up online?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay, so he has, those are supplementary articles which in slightly different words, I explain a lot of these ideas. Okay? Yes.
Oh, yes,
I just wanted to give the students a chance first. No, it's okay. Anybody else? The floor is yours.
yes, the duty, the System of Natural Liberty, Adam Smith,
Yes.
the duty to protect society from the outside forces. Is this what the U.S. uses as a rationale to develop the CIA and the...
Now, the question is that Adam Smith's idea of a legitimate function of government, is that what is the rationale for the United States to use things like the CIA or the National Security Agency, which is listening to everything we're saying and doing, even inside a building? Hi, President Obama. How you doing today? Is this I would argue, as an advocate of liberty, that these are unjustifiable and unnecessary extensions and intrusions of government power into people's lives. I see no reason why the NSA should be listening to everything I'm saying, including my criticisms of them, nor do I think that it is the responsibility of the U.S. government, which has the function of protecting the life and property of their own citizens, to be having foreign adventures in other countries, when in fact often the outcomes through that intervention end up making the situation worse and not better. So no, I'm not an advocate or a supporter or a justifier of those policies. I think it is inconsistent with Adam Smith's notion of a system of natural liberty.
Some time ago, the Jews invaded they didn't really invade. They sent off their bombers and they had to destroy some smelters that Mr. Saddam Hussein was building, and the world came down against them. But they justified the bombing on the grounds that these guys were building something that was going to threaten our existence. And based on that, how do you draw the line between what is moral and
I admit, the example is that several years ago, before the second U.S. war in Iraq, the one that overthrew Saddam, the Israeli government had been afraid that the Iraqis, Saddam Hussein was building a nuclear reactor that could be a bomb, and so they, through a preemptive strike, knocked it out. Is that justifiable under Adam Smith's circumstances? Separate from the Middle East thing, just talking about two nations are near each other and one is suspicious about the other, the broadest setting. I don't think that's an easy question to answer. It's sort of like you're walking in a dark alley at night and some guy is at the other end of the alley and he's approaching you, what seems to be in a menacing form. Okay, he has a knife in his hand, okay? And he's saying something that you can't quite make out. What should your response be? Okay, it depends. Now, he might just be drunk and just doesn't mean to do anything, or his demeanor, actions, and verbal sounds may suggest an aggressive act towards you. And assuming you can't make a retreat, okay, is it appropriate to take a preemptive action against him? Now, the law, British law, American law, French law, all have their variations of the idea that if you feel that you're under an imminent threat as an individual, you are allowed to defend yourself. In other words, you can self-defend yourself against the person with a gun or a knife even before he has shot you or stabbed you, if a reasonable man, right, would view this as an imminent threat, so it's still an act of self-defense. You see what I'm saying? Every country's law recognizes that in one form. You have to prove it. There are standards of demonstration and proof to justify that, particularly if you severely injure or kill the person who you thought was potentially aggressing against you. But every country has such laws on the books. Of that would be interpreted as a version of it. Now, one presumes that that's the situation with a government that is charged with national defense, do you have to wait for a bomb to drop, or is it appropriate to take action before that bomb drops? That is not an easy question to answer. And I'm not going to make a statement about the Israelis at that time or about Iran today, because that's very controversial and intricate and complex. But law recognizes the right of the individual of such preemptive self-defense. One would logically presume that a government could rationalize that as well. Whether the government doing it is justifiable in a particular instance or not is a matter of the court of world opinion. Okay, any other comments or questions? Any other comments or questions? Going once, going twice. Sold, okay. You just want to get to that lunch food. I understand that. Stop talking, I want to eat. I understand that. I'm going to go eat myself, so I appreciate that. All right, I hope you've enjoyed the second lecture. If your schedule permits it, we will be back with one more lecture today at 1 o'clock.